Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Genuinely Interested podcast. I'm your host, Roy Bensby. And this week, we have a very special guest. It's a little bit of a funny story. About a couple of weeks back, I put out a tweet saying, this is my wish list of 10 people that I'd love to have on. And then one of them tweeted back saying, hey, we can do this. And that person was Captain Paul Watson, who is in charge of Sea Shepherd. If you don't know Sea Shepherd, they're a organization, a movement that was founded, I think, around 1977. And basically, they protect marine wildlife around the world. They, stop these whaling vessels near Antarctica, and they've stopped vessels basically all across the world. I think they're most famous for whales, obviously, because they were on whale wars, and they've had a bunch of documentaries, and usually that's what you see. But they help other marine wildlife. I guess that's just not as sexy at times. Some of the other fish that they help, but they do a wide array of work across the oceans, and they don't mess around. They're a very serious movement. They don't. This isn't Greenpeace, although Paul Watson was part of the founding members, the youngest one actually, as he mentions on the podcast. But they stop boats by physically getting in the way. So this isn't, a hippy dippy movement. They mean business, although they never hurt anybody. That's not the aim. The aim is just to stop the ships from hurting the marine wildlife. So, I've been following him for many, many years, and I admire what he does, his singularity, his approach to things. I do agree that sometimes you have to pull your sleeves up, and protest and peaceful protest isn't necessarily always the best approach, although sometimes it is. It really depends on the situation. So, again, he was a great guy to have on. We talked about many different things. I always admired their use of media, which, I don't think you see as much with a lot of other organizations, nonprofits, movements, etc. So they're almost a production company. They just consistently put out content and documentaries and part of shows on Animal Planet. And I think that's amazing because you have to get in front of people, and out there in the ocean, no one sees you. So the best weapon is a camera. So if you can get your word out there, and if you can get your images and the videos, I think that's a very powerful tool that they use very well. So, I was happy to have Paul on the show. There's not a lot of people like him, I think, that are so fearless in what they do and so dedicated to their cause. Nowadays, it's more about me, rather than us, or rather than fighting for a cause that is bigger than yourself. And nothing's bigger than the ocean, literally. And he has a saying, if the oceans die, we die, which is very true. It is literal foundation of Earth, and we are plundering it and polluting it and just basically ruining the oceans and its inhabitants. So people like Paul and Sea Shepherd and other people as well, but he's definitely one of the bigger names and icons and movements. They are crucial to the survival of the oceans, and they've done a lot of good work over the past 40 or 50 years that they've been around. So again, big honor to have him. I was a little nervous, I think, because again, it's someone that I've been following for a very long time. I admire what he does, and I just wanted to do the best job possible. So definitely felt a little bit nervous, but I feel like that, I don't think that shows as much, but it is what it is. Sometimes that happens and you just have to accept it. But regardless, I had a good time. I hope that in the future I can interview him again. I hope I can interview a few other people that were on the list. There's 9 to go. So I'll be working on those 9. It might take some time, but I believe that eventually I'll get them all. So without further ado, here is Captain Paul Watson. Hey, Paul, thank you so much for coming on the show. How you doing today?
Oh, pretty good. Thank you.
You're someone that, I've wanted to have on for a while, even before I had the podcast. I've been following you and your career for a very long time. So it's an honor. It's a pleasure to have you on. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Well, my pleasure.
So yeah, we can kind of jump right into it. You were part of the founding team of in Greenpeace. Can you kind of tell us how that all came about and why you eventually founded Sea Shepherd?
I was the youngest founding member of Greenpeace, and it began in 1969 at a demonstration of the U.S. Canadian border against nuclear testing in Amchitka Island. And out of that demonstration, we formed a group called the Don't Make a Wave Committee. And two groups came together to make that. It was the Sierra Club and Quakers, of all things.
Oh,
And we, at an early meeting, we decided we wanted to do something about the Amchitka bombing. And the Quakers had sent a vessel to Bikini Atoll in 1956. So we decided, well, let's send a boat up to Amchitka Island. And that came up with that idea. And we formed this group called the Don't Make a Wave Committee because people were still, it was fresh in their memory about the earthquake in Anchorage in 64 and the tsunami that hit Vancouver Island in Hawaii. So at one of the early meetings, somebody left the meeting and flashed a peace sign, and Bill Darnell, one of our members there, he said, when they flashed the peace sign, they said peace, and he said, make it a Greenpeace. And Bob Hunter said, hey, that's a great name for the boat. So we named the boat the Greenpeace. And it wasn't until 72 that we actually changed the name of the Don't Make a Wave Committee to the Greenpeace Foundation, taking the word foundation from Isaac Asimov's Foundation trilogy. And so that was the origin of Greenpeace. And I was with Greenpeace until 77, and then I left to set up the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society that year.
so there were just some ideological differences, and you decided to form your own organization.
Well, Greenpeace is a protest organization, and I was never really much into protesting. To me, it's a very submissive sort of thing. You know, it's like, please, please, please don't do this. Don't kill the whales.
Yeah.
Anyway. And so all they're doing, taking pictures and hanging banners. So I wanted to intervene. So I set Sea Shepherd up to intervene, not to protest, and go after illegal activities. Really, we're a marine anti-poaching organization, and that's what we've been for 42 years.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are definitely awesome. I think one of the strengths that you guys have is obviously the how you draw a lot of media attention, and you've been in many documentaries. Is that part of a concerted effort on your part to educate the public and get the message of Sea Shepherd across?
Well, when we put together Greenpeace, it was no accident that all the founders were either broadcasters or journalists. I was a communications major at the time. So it was we understood right from the beginning that we lived in a media culture, and therefore we had to, operate within the rules that the media had set.
Mm-hmm.
Robert Hunter had invented a term called mind bombs, which today means sort of like going viral. But in other words, you get out there and dramatize the issues. And if you want to get people to focus on an issue to get your message, you had to dramatize it. You had to actually be the story. And that's what we began to do when I was with Greenpeace, and that's what we continue to do with Sea Shepherd. So I learned very early that the most powerful weapon on the planet is the camera. So we made sure that we documented everything that we did and continue to do so.
Yeah, I mean, on some of the shows and the documentaries with the music and the dramatic features of the ocean, it almost looks like a movie, like a Hollywood movie, which is very compelling. I'm sure to the audience. Is that something that you think maybe some of the other organizations and nonprofits maybe aren't utilizing or aren't doing as well?
Well, I think a lot of them are doing that. They've learned to do that. It's a way to get message across. As Marshall McLuhan once said, the media is more important than the message it conveys. So you have to control your message through controlling the media.
Yeah.
And so that's what we do.
You have a famous saying, if the oceans die, we all die. Can you explain that to people a little bit, what that means?
Well, if the ocean dies, we all die. That's what it means. The ocean is the life support system of the planet, and we're
Yeah.
destroying that life support system. And for instance, since 1950, we've had a 40% diminishment in the population of phytoplankton in the ocean. Phytoplankton provides 70% of the oxygen that we breathe. If phytoplankton were to disappear tomorrow, so would we. We're absolutely dependent upon that group of species of oceanic plant life in order to be alive ourselves. We're interdependent with every other species, and the strength of an ecosystem is in diversity and in the interdependence of the species within that diversity. And if that falls apart, so do we. I like to compare it to the Earth is like a spaceship, and it has a life support system, and that life support system is run by a crew on board, and we're not crew members. We human beings, we're passengers. We're having a wonderful time amusing ourselves. But what we are doing is killing off the crew members. And it can only kill off so many crew members till the machinery begins to fall apart. And the crew members, well, that's the bacteria and the phytoplankton and the trees and the bees and the worms. We're killing them off. And we can only do that so far before we follow them.
Yeah, it's a good analogy. And I mean, I guess that's why I wanted you to elaborate on if the oceans die, we all die, because I don't, I think people just look at it as a body of water and not realize that how dependent we are on this ecosystem. I think most people think of the forest, and obviously the forests are, it's a major part. It's the lungs of the ocean in a way, of the planet in a way, but the ocean is integral to the survival of our species.
Well, I think we have to take a look at just what is the ocean. In most people's minds, the ocean is the sea.
Mm-hmm.
But in fact, this is the planet ocean. It's in water. It's water in continuous circulation. Sometimes it's in the sea. Sometimes it's locked in ice. It's in the atmosphere. It's underground. And it's in the cells of every living plant and animal. So the water that's in your body right now is once in the sea, once in the ice, once in the clouds, constantly circulating. So what is the ocean? We are the ocean, each and every one of us, and we're all interconnected to each and every other part of the ocean.
Mm-hmm. So why focus specifically on whales? Most of your efforts over the decades has been whales. Why focus specifically on that mammal?
Well, actually, we don't. That's things that get attention. Now, Sea Shepherd is involved in all marine wildlife.
Okay.
We actually have more campaigns protecting fish. And so we work on protecting everything from plankton to the great whales. Whales and dolphins and sharks tend to get more publicity because the public finds that more attractive.
Mm-hmm.
When we do our campaigns to protect, say, sea cucumbers in the Galapagos Islands, well, it's not as sexy, so that doesn't get that much coverage. But because we do campaigns to protect whales and sharks and seals, for example, that gives us the support to also direct our attentions toward other species, which wouldn't otherwise get the attention. We did a film called Chasing the Thunder, and one of our most successful campaigns was to shut down the toothfish poachers off the coast of Antarctica. It was the longest pursuit in maritime history. We pursued that poaching vessel for 110 days from the coast of Antarctica to equatorial West Africa.
Wow.
And we actually shut down all 6 of those toothfish poachers within a year. Now, nobody really knows too much about what toothfish are, except in the restaurants it's sold as Chilean sea bass. It's an endangered species. And so we focus on species right across the board, not just whales.
Yeah, so I guess whales it's the most dramatic, maybe, when you see a harpoon just, flying off a boat and hitting a whale. I guess that's something that, the documentaries and the TV shows always pick up on. Because I mean, the majority of the documentaries, at least that I've seen, have always been around whales. And obviously there was that show Whale Wars. So I think that's the perception that the public has.
Yeah, but we do have other documentaries. Chasing the Thunder is about the toothfish. There can be just one is about our campaigns to protect sea turtles. Sea of Shadows is our campaign to protect the endangered Vaquita porpoise in the Sea of Cortez. And we'll be coming out with a film this year called Seaspiracy, which is covering the destruction of fisheries, industrialized fishings the world over.
Well, yeah, I'll have to watch out for that one. Did Whale Wars kind of give you that major boost as far as maybe validating you or bringing you, to the mainstream public awareness?
Well, we had documentaries before, and then in 2006, we did a campaign called The Edge of the World and made a documentary about it. And
Yeah, I saw that one. Yeah, that was
that was
great.
really the pilot for Whale Wars. I went to the various networks and I said, look, the most popular show on Discovery right now is about these guys going out in very remote areas, very cold areas to catch crabs. And I said, well, we can give you a show where it's men and women from all over the world going to an even more remote, even colder place to protect whales. Has to be more interesting than catching crabs every week. And so Discovery Animal Planet decided to go with it. It became their number one show for quite a few years.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, like I said, it makes for great TV. Um, so yeah,
It's your basic David and Goliath versus type of show up against the powerful government of Japan, and it's a very awesome whaling fleet, and we were able to subjugate it. We shut down their quotas every year by 30% down once to 10% and finally we drove them out of the Southern Ocean. We won that case. The Southern Ocean Whale Sanctuary is now totally protected 100%. And this is the first year in the history of whaling that not a single whale will be killed in international waters. So when I look back at what's been accomplished since 1975, where they were killing 25, 30,000 whales a year, now they're down to a couple of thousand. Also, we were taking on countries like Australia and Chile and Peru and Spain. We were confronting the Australians in 77. So we've achieved a lot in that time. And my one real ambition with whaling is to see it eradicated completely in my lifetime. And I think we're about 90% there.
Yeah, I mean, I read. I mean, I don't know. This is probably related to COVID-19, but I did read that Iceland has hunted basically zero whales this year, which is the first time in I don't know forever that has happened. So
in 2018, we documented every single whale they killed. We didn't have a ship in the area, but we sent teams there and we documented every whale killed in Iceland, and we caught them breaking numerous laws, including taking a blue whale and then trying to cover it up. So in 2019, we sent one of our vessels there. No whales were killed in 2019. And again, now no whales will be killed in 2020. The whaling operation that targeted minke whales is shut down permanently. The fin whale operation, they say they're going to go on, but we'll be keeping the pressure on until we shut them down. Whaling is now restricted to only Japan, Iceland, and Norway. And Norway is actually the largest whaling nation in the world right now, but all of it's done within their territorial waters. So we'll be keeping the pressure on them. We've been concentrating on Iceland for the last 2 years, but we will be turning our attention towards Norway.
So would you say Norway has been the most persistent in trying to keep this practice alive?
Norway has been the most blatant in carrying on illegal whaling activities and thumbing their nose at international regulations. They just do it. And, Japan at least tried to do the pretense of scientific whaling. Everybody knew it was bogus.
Yeah.
But the Norwegians and the Icelanders just said, we're going to do whatever we want. And so it's been a little more difficult with those countries.
So weird because, the Scandinavian countries are usually very, not friendly. I don't want to say friendly, but, very compliant, very good-willed, very friendly. I guess that's a good word. But, when they're so blatant about this one thing, and it's very weird that that's some sort of a tradition that they try to keep alive.
Norway and Denmark, those countries, they might seem very liberal on the surface, but it's usually a case of do what we say, but not as we do. They've got horrendous records in wildlife management and in their forestries. Norway has polluted the world with their domestic salmon operations and whaling, overfishing, on and on and on. I mean, when the Prime Minister of Norway gets down on Brazil for destroying their rainforest, forgets that Norway's destroyed more of their rainforest, per area.
Yeah.
In fact, Gro Harlem Brundtland at the 92 Conference on the Environment in Brazil coined the word sustainable. What does sustainable mean? It means business as usual under another name. There's no such thing as a sustainable fishery anymore, no such thing as sustainable whaling. But it's come to the point where all you have to do is tack the word sustainable onto anything you do, and then all of a sudden it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of these words being thrown around, especially when it comes to food. It'll say sustainable or farm fresh, or I mean, I think other than organic, which has to actually be certified, there's a lot of these buzzwords that don't really mean anything. It's just something that makes the consumer feel good that they bought something that's yeah, like I said, quote unquote sustainable.
No, it's true. And, I don't think there's any sustainable industry. You cannot have sustainable exploitation in a world with 8 billion human beings and growing constantly. Our numbers have exceeded the resources that are available. And what we're doing now is stealing the carrying capacity from other species. They have to go extinct so our numbers can increase, plus the numbers of our domestic slaves or domestic animals. And but the problem is that when you steal carrying capacity, you diminish the diversity and interdependence, and it all leads towards an eventual collapse. This has all led to climate change, acidification in the ocean, pollution in the ocean. What this is all leading to are some very serious consequences. We're beginning to see that right now. For years, I've predicted that one of the consequences of climate change will be uh, the release of pathogens, new viruses, because most people don't pay attention to what a virus is and how many there are. Every single species on this planet, plant and animal, has a virus or a group of viruses associated with it. Viruses are billions of years old. They're absolutely essential for life to exist on this planet. Viruses help the hosts digest their food, fight off pathogens, do so many things. It's really a very sort of a peaceful coexistence between host and virus. The problem is when you diminish your ecosystems, you cause a thing called zoonotic transmission, which is a virus jumping from one species because their numbers are so low and their habitats are being destroyed onto a more easily accessible species. And 8 billion human beings are pretty attractive.
Yeah.
So a lot of species, this is going to happen more and more, where you're going to have zoonotic transmission. Like most of the diseases that we suffer from, like even the common cold, comes from horses. MERS comes from camels. SARS comes from birds. Flu comes from pigs. So Ebola from monkeys.
Yeah.
This is going to happen more and more. And on top of that, you're having pathogens and viruses, in fact, including superviruses, coming out of the melting permafrost that have been dormant for 40, 50,000 years. And who knows what that can cause.
So, I'll hear a lot of different perspectives on this, but a lot of people will say, how can we control what's going on in Asia, where, to be honest, a good amount of the pathogens and viruses have come out of for the last, I don't know, couple of decade, and what they do in these wet markets, and
Uh,
it's a mix of dogs and all these different animals just in little cages, and their feces on one on top of the other, and there looks like they are clamping down on it. They said that wildlife trade has stopped completely, but I don't know how much you can trust that coming out of the Chinese government. Is there
well,
any? Yeah, go ahead.
the problem is the wet markets are not just in China; they're all over. Factory farming, that's wet markets. You have 65 billion animals being slaughtered every year. It's incredibly destructive to the environment. But more important is you got these like tens of thousands of animals crowded in concentration camp conditions, so that diseases just run through them like wildfire.
In CAFOs,
And
right?
what's that?
In CAFOs.
Yeah, well, yeah, like chicken farms, for example.
Yeah.
They have that's why you constantly see this. If you pay attention to it, you constantly see them destroying vast numbers of pigs or chickens every year in order to deal with the disease outbreaks that come on these factory farms. So, and then and also to do it, they give these animals intense amounts of antibiotics and so many other chemicals that are being used to prevent the diseases from spreading. But they're getting out of control.
Yeah, I mean, there's it's horrendous, these practices that are happening both in the West and in Asia, and pretty much everywhere. I mean, wherever there's I think we look at animals only in monetary terms. It's either we can eat them or we can make them into fashion or accessories or put them for tourists to ride like elephants in Thailand or, circuses or SeaWorld, et cetera, et cetera. It's endless. And I mean, like you said, it is getting better, but for some unfortunate reason, a lot of humans still see animals as only if they can help them in a monetary way rather than this has value just because it is what it is, just because it's an animal, it's sentient, it has, wants and needs, and we should just let it be in its, natural habitat.
Yeah, and we're going, but the real problem is too many people, not enough resources, and as our numbers grow, we push away other species, and there's only so many other species you can do that to until things begin to fall apart. Right now, there are more human beings plus our domestic animals than there are all the other wildlife put together. So when you take all the chickens, all the pigs, all the cows, and all the humans, put them together, that biomass is greater than the rest of the of natural world's biomass. So that's the problem.
Yeah. So, throughout your career, you've been, arrested, condemned, called an eco-terrorist. You've had or have, I don't know, a warrant issued by the Interpol. Can you explain why someone that is trying to save whales and the oceans and animals would be vilified to such a degree and to the extent of the Interpol putting a warrant against you?
Well, anybody who's trying to change anything is going to be vilified.
Yeah.
But Interpol has a red notice on me. Red notices are for serial killers, war criminals, and major drug traffickers. I'm the only person in history to have a Interpol red notice for conspiracy to trespass. On
Really?
a Japanese whaling, which really just shows you how powerful Japan is,
Mm-hmm.
that they can do that. I was on Costa Rica, had me on the red notice, but when they had a change of government, it was dismissed. So that illustrates just how political it is. That change of government, suddenly it goes away. So what Japan was a criminal nation here. Japan was down there killing whales in an established international whale sanctuary, and we were trying to uphold international conservation law. So they're the criminals. We're the ones who are trying to stop them, but they have the power. So that's the difference.
Yeah, I mean it's it's a little bit of a thankless job at times because animals they can come up and thank you, and hunters they want to kill you or harm you, and public opinion can sway in in either direction based on a whim really. So where's that inner drive to keep going and do what you do?
Well, they do call us eco terrorists and everything. I have no idea what an eco terrorist is, but I'm certainly not one. I've never worked for Monsanto or Chevron. I mean,
Yeah.
not. But why do I do what I do? Back in 1973, I was a medic for the American Indian movement during the occupation of Wounded Knee, and I learned a very valuable lesson there. We were surrounded by about 3,000 federal agents who were shooting 20,000 rounds a night into the village. There are 350 or 60 of us, and so they killed 2 of us and wounded 46. And I went to Russell Means, who was the leader of the American Indian movement. I said, look, we're completely surrounded. We have no hope of winning. The odds are against us. So why are we here? And his answer stayed with me for the rest of my life. He said, we're not here because we're concerned about the odds against us. We're not here because we're concerned about winning or losing. We're here because this is the right place to be, the right time to do it, and the right thing to do. And what you do today will define what the future will be. Don't worry about the future. Concentrate on the present, and that will define the future. And so that's I've kept that motto all my life.
Well, so that stayed with you your whole life?
Yeah. So I don't really, I don't worry about the odds against us, and I don't worry about winning or losing. I just do what I think is right. And it's amazing how many times you can go into these confrontations and you win, even though you didn't look like you had any hope of doing so. Back in 1979, I chased the pirate whaler Sierra across the Atlantic and into a Portuguese port. And there were 20 of us on board the ship. And I said to my crew, I said, look, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to ram that vessel. I'm going to disable it. Now, I can't say you won't get hurt, but I can guarantee you 100% you're going to go to prison in Portugal. So if you don't want to do that, you got 10 minutes to pack your bag and get out on the dock because I'm going.
Yeah.
10 minutes later, 17 of them were on the dock. Fortunately, the 2 guys who stayed with me were engineers, Peter Wolf from Australia and Jerry Duran from Hawaii. And so we left the dock, went out, and we rammed and disabled and shut down the career of that pirate whaling operation. We were pursued by a Portuguese destroyer, and we were brought back and under arrest. And I was brought before the port captain in La Chose, Portugal, and charged with gross criminal negligence. And I looked at the captain. I said, "Well, Captain, there was nothing negligent about it. We hit that ship exactly where we intend to hit it. It was deliberate." And
Yeah.
he sort of smiled and he said, "Well, the problem is I don't know who owns that ship because they won't come forward. And until they do, you're free to go." So I walked out the door and one of my crew members said, "Well, if I knew you were going to get away with it, I would have been there too." Well, sometimes you just have to go ahead and do things that there's no way out. And miraculously, you find your way out. There's so many cases that's happened to us over the years like that. We've gone in and into a hopeless cause and we've won.
Yeah. I mean, you're pretty fearless. I mean, there's a bunch of stories, and I'm sure there's stories where untold stories that no one knows about, but there's that famous one where you're on the whale, and the Russian harpoons just shot that harpoon just right above your head. And, there's a lot of other stories in this one as well. I don't think a lot of people would go into some of these situations knowing, hey, I actually could die. But, you do it over and over and over again. So I think that takes character that maybe a lot of people lack.
Well, when people join my crew, the one question I ask them are you prepared to risk your life to protect a whale? And if they say no, then we don't take them. And critics have said, well, that's a little unreasonable asking somebody to risk their life to protect a whale. And I said, really? We ask young people all the time to risk their life, in fact, to kill people to protect oil wells, real estate, religion, or flags. I think that protecting an endangered species is a far more noble endeavor.
I agree. You've saved, over the years and decades, actually, thousands of whales and I'm sure other animals as well. And you've been part of countless expeditions. Is there one, I mean, it's probably hard, but is there one achievement that kind of stands out that you remember the most?
Well, I think that driving the Japanese whaling fleet out of the Southern Ocean permanently is a major achievement. We cost them over $150 million. We saved 6,500 whales. The very fact that those whales are swimming free in the Southern Ocean now, that gives us a great sense of satisfaction. So I would say that was probably one of our most successful campaigns.
So I want to circle back to Norway for a second, that we talked about earlier. So, I mean, it seems like the rest of the world doesn't do this. So what's the reason Norway keeps, hunting these whales? What do they actually use it for? What's the reason behind it?
Norway and Iceland were killing whales primarily for the Japanese market, but they're not doing that anymore. And that's one of the reasons Iceland stopped. But Norway has found ways of utilizing that whale meat. They were, feeding it to fur-bearing animals on fur farms. They denied that until we actually proved it 100%, and then they had to admit to it. I believe they're also using it to feed their domesticated salmon on salmon farms too. But they also they're under the impression that whales and seals and seabirds are a threat to the fish. That if we lower populations of predatory animals like whales, there'll be more fish. There's really no scientific credibility to that argument. In fact, it's just the opposite. If you want more fish, more whales, you need more seals because they contribute back to it. Whales, for instance, whales are really the farmers of the ocean. One of the reasons we've had a 40% diminishment in phytoplankton populations is because phytoplankton need special nutrients, nitrogen and iron, and that's provided through the feces of marine mammals, especially whales. Every day one blue whale drops 3 tons of manure into the ocean, which is heavily rich with nitrogen and iron. So when you lower the populations of those animals, you're going to diminish the population of phytoplankton, which is one of the most essential things on the planet. So at one time, there were 45 million seals in the North Atlantic Ocean going back 500 years. Now the seal population is less than 10% of what it was. And all the fishermen are saying, well, they're taking all our fish. Well, how come there was no shortage of fish 500 years ago when there was 45 million seals? Because seals, they perform a very important function ecologically. For instance, the harp seal concentrates on capelin mackerel primarily, and those two species feed on young cod. So when you lower harvest seal populations, you increase capelin and mackerel populations, which decrease cod populations. When these fishermen and the governments look at an ecosystem, all they see are seals, fish, and people. There's three things. But if you look at the Northeast Atlantic Ocean, there's about 970 species that are there working interdependently with each other. You can't separate one out of the other. And the one species that doesn't belong is the human species.
Yeah.
The reason that we're seeing diminishment of fish in the ocean has got nothing to do with whales and seals and everything to do with human greed.
Is commercial fishing pretty much the worst thing that we can do to the oceans? I mean, I think I read for every one either kilo or pound of fish caught, there's another 5 pounds or kilos of other fish that get caught that are just discarded back into the oceans. You know, it could be turtles, it could be birds, it could be sharks, dolphins, et cetera, et cetera. So that has to be the worst, right?
The bycatch is greater than the actual catch itself.
Yeah.
Industrialized fishing, bottom trawls, midwater trawls, longliners, gill netters, drift nets. These are highly industrialized methods for really just plundering the oceans. We really need a 50-year moratorium at least in order to protect the oceans, to give the ocean time to repair the damage that we've done to it. Actually, right now, it's good news. Half the world's fishing fleet is not going out, and that bodes well for the fish.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask. Well, so in these times and in COVID-19, you know, we're seeing all these animals, right? There's all these videos of animals coming out of hiding of places and then going into cities, and people are seeing, you know, animals that they haven't seen in years. There was also I saw in Africa, there was a wild cat or some sort of a cat that they actually thought was extinct. So we're seeing this resurgence of animals coming out of quote unquote out of their hiding. But long run, do you think this is going to be beneficial or detrimental to animals, COVID-19?
Well,
the environment, animals.
It's going to be beneficial for as long as it lasts. But, you know, COVID-19 is just a harbinger of worse things to come. If we don't change our behavior, if we don't learn to live in harmony with all of the other species, then we're going to see more pandemics. We're going to see, and also because of climate warming, we're going to see rising sea levels and stronger storms and more drought and more flooding and all of these issues that we're seeing all the time. Anybody who denies that climate change is a reality is being willfully ignorant. They're just saying it's in their own interest to deny it. But any sailor can tell you that it's a real thing.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, I know you're originally from Canada, but you know the U.S. fairly well, and you know that there's a good percentage of people that actually deny climate change and do think it's a hoax and don't actually believe in it. Or I don't know if they don't believe in it truly or they're just acting, but they're definitely I would say ruining public perception and what the world thinks about it. So they're using lobbyists, they're using all these different methods in order to keep the same industries that are ruining the environment, you know, working.
Well, people are quite willing to lie if it gets in the way of their profits. That's always been. But it's also, we have to look at it, the way we view the world is from a strictly anthropocentric point of view. And it's been that way for the last 10,000 years. Prior to that, we looked in the world as from a biocentric point of view, which is we're part of this. Yeah. Everything is interdependent. But now it's, you know, we're in charge. We're the dominant life form. It was all created for us. We're the only species that matters. That is the mindset of humanity, which can be called anthropocentrism. Every single religion on this planet is anthropocentric, meaning every single religion holds human beings as the center of everything. And that's just not reality. Reality is, in fact, this planet is controlled by bacteria, viruses, funguses, and algae, and trees. And that. These are the species that rule the planet. We're just living in their world. You know.
Yeah, we're just guests.
Yeah, and it's been that way for 1 billion years. So we're just passing through. So, and we're not that important.
No.
But of course, it's hard for us to understand that.
Yeah.
But what's going to happen, when you look at the history of mass extinctions on this planet, the most serious being 250 million years ago with the Permian extinction, wiped out 97% of everything. And for the same reasons, because of excess CO2 in the atmosphere causing runaway climate change. That at the time was caused by volcanoes in Siberia and the igniting of massive deposits of coal, which burned. But right now, we're seeing the same amount of parts per million of carbon as we did at the beginning of the Permian extinction. But what all of those mass extinctions had in common was it took 15 to 20 million years for a full recovery. And so whatever we do, 15 to 20 million years from now, it's going to be a new planet. So this isn't about saving the planet. It's about saving ourselves from
Yeah.
ourselves.
Yeah. The planet will be fine. The planet, it's been around before us and it'll stay after us. But, we are the ones at risk. Our kids, our grandkids, they're the ones at risk. And, every prediction kind of always hits 2050. And, they're saying by 2050, there's going to be 10 billion people. We're going to need 4 or 5 times the amount of resources that we currently use, and it's just not enough. And I I don't know. I'm pessimistic. I'm not very optimistic. I'll be honest about anything climate change related and the future, especially now with COVID-19, which dominates headlines. I feel like climate change, which before got a little bit of, it got some momentum. That's all dead. No one's talking about anything except this right now.
Yeah. Well, I think they're being very conservative when they say there's going to be 10 billion people by 2050. The world I was born in had 3 billion people in it, and
Yeah.
now it's almost 2 billion. And
Yeah.
I'm still alive. So I think that
Thank
it's
God for
going to
that.
be a lot higher than that. Uh, but if we don't solve the problem ourselves, nature's laws will solve it for us, which will not be as kind as if we did it ourselves.
So, I mean, so you can easily say you're an icon in animal activism. You're up there with, Jane Goodall and Sylvia Earle and many others. Is there a point where you say, okay, I'm done. I've done my part. It's time for the next generation to take the metaphorical and physical wheel and start steering the ship?
Well, I don't really understand the concept of this generation or the next generation. The generation that I'm in is the generation that's living right now. And it doesn't matter how old you are or how young
Yeah.
you are. We are the generation. It's almost like we've relegated ourselves as being irrelevant when you say, oh, the next generation. We are the generation. Um,
So that's a no.
so, yeah, well, see, the thing is I feel sorry for a lot of younger people today because they will never enjoy the freedoms and also the materialistic wealth that we had in the 60s and 70s. 50s, 60s, and 70s were probably the most affluent and free time in the history of the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have that anymore, and we won't have it anymore. And, because the things that we could do in the 60s and 70s, you could never get away with right now. I mean, I remember I blockaded St. John's Harbor for 2 weeks and wouldn't let anything in or out. I mean, you couldn't do that today.
No.
We sank half Iceland's whaling fleet in 1986 and destroyed the whale processing plant, didn't get charged. You couldn't do that today. So it's much more difficult.
Do you think it was to an extent a more, I don't know if naive is the right word, but I think we're just the world has become a little bit more aggressive with time, a little bit more militant, a little bit more, technologically advanced, obviously, and things that, if you look at like movies from the 50s and 60s, you're like, oh, wow, they were so naive, so cute back then. And now we've kind of lost I think, I don't know, we've just lost a lot of that.
Well, I think governments have become more authoritarian everywhere. That's certainly the case. And everything's under control. So today it's government by the corporations, for the corporations, of the corporations.
Yeah.
It's not by people. People are irrelevant.
So we were talking about commercial fishing. Nets are one of the worst forms of plastic in the ocean. Yet instead of, stopping consumption of eating fish, people choose to, use less straws. There was a big campaign about, stop sucking, which basically meant stop using plastic straws. Um, are these kind of campaigns actually, do you think, are hurting by getting people to think that they're doing these great things when in reality they're actually doing very little? Or is it
Well,
a case of it's better than nothing?
I don't think you can say, well, because people say, well, this amount of plastic is going in from the fishing industry, so why are we focusing on plastic straws? Keep in mind, it's 300 billion straws every year. It's not just one or two straws.
Yeah.
And it's something that's very easily changed. I mean, why is it called a straw? In the 1920s and the 30s, a straw was made of straw, you know? So there's so many things that you can replace it with: bamboo, with
Bamboo,
paper, with
yeah.
metal. I mean, you don't need plastic straws. So it's very symbolic of everything that we're doing with plastic. Plastic shopping bags are another example. Now, because of COVID-19, you're not allowed to bring your own bag into the stores. You got to use a plastic bag. It's like it's a reversal. But plastic, when I was a child walking on the beach in Eastern Canada, I never saw a single piece of plastic. It wasn't a problem. And so it's come upon us pretty fast.
So I was watching, I believe it was Whale Wars. I was watching some videos on YouTube, and you guys had some. You were trying to stop. I believe it was one of the Japanese ships, if I'm not mistaken. And you had all these, slick tactics like throwing butyric acid and flour bombs. How did I always wondered, how did you come up with those type of tactics?
Well, you have to come up with tactics that are not going to hurt anybody. I call it aggressive nonviolence. In our entire 42 years of operations, we've never caused a single injury to anybody. But you got to come up with things which are going to be a deterrent but aren't going to hurt anyone. Butyric acid, what is butyric acid? It's basically rotten butter.
Mhm.
It's not going to hurt you. It just smells horrendous. But that's the only thing. And we use water cannons and things like this, but we don't actually aim them directly at it. I think probably the funniest tactic we ever did was we tossed these crocodile eggs onto the deck of the Japanese vessels. And what these crocodile eggs, they weren't real crocodile eggs, but when they got wet, out popped a big crocodile, a pink crocodile. So it was just driving the Japanese crazy because all these pink crocodiles kept popping up on their deck and they didn't know what they were. They thought the worst was some sort of sinister thing. But, we do a lot of the things that we did on Whale Wars, mainly for effect.
Yeah.
The only real thing that actually worked is blocking their slipway, preventing them from loading dead whales. If they couldn't load a dead whale, they couldn't kill any more.
Mhm.
And that was the thing that really worked. And that's what we were concentrating on. Everything else we did was just theatrics.
Yeah. And I mean, that works as well because that kind of gets public opinion and, that gets viewers. And so that's also, it's a great tactic because it makes for good TV.
And of course, the other effective tactic was to prevent them from refueling their vessels by getting between them and the refuelers. And that was very successful.
So I've always been fascinated with, singular people. Me personally, like I'm interested in so many different things and I divide my time up and so many times I neglect something because I'm like, oh, I get focused on this thing and I get focused on the other thing. But you have people, like yourself who seem to be very singular in singular drive, singular mission approach, and they'll dedicate their whole lives. And, I think that's amazing. We need more people like that. Was there ever a time, day, event that you kind of realized that this is something you want to dedicate your whole life to? Or is this something that just organically evolved with time?
Well, I never gave much thought. I started rescuing beavers when I was 11 years old, walking trap lines, destroying the traps, freeing the animals. And I just sort of been doing the same thing ever since. So I never really gave it much thought. It just sort of evolved
Yeah.
that way. So I never had to make a career choice, I guess.
um, so the final question I guess I have for you is I know there's a new documentary. I was actually trying to find it online, but I couldn't find it anywhere. It's called Watson, and I'm assuming it's a documentary about yourself. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, Leslie Chilcott, she was the producer and director of film Watson. She did Inconvenient Truth with Al Gore, and so she
Oh,
came to
it's
me to do the film, and I think it's an excellent film. It really, I think, is motivating, especially to a lot of younger people. And so it's been purchased by Discovery, and it's been aired on Animal Planet and Discovery in about 200 different countries so far. So I think I don't know if I think it might be available on Hulu. But
Okay.
yeah, there's also Sea of Shadows about our Bikita campaign, which was sold to National Geographic, and they're airing that. And in fact, it just got a Peabody Award today, I think. Then there's Conserve, Defend, Protect about our campaigns down in the Southern Ocean. And we have another documentary on sea turtles called Why Just One. So ongoing, everything we do, we document and try to get that message out through the media of film.
Yeah. I mean, you're almost like a production company. I don't think there's any other organization that puts that, that much content out there like you guys.
Yeah, well, the advantage that we have is that we're not an organization. We're a movement, and we're in about 42 different countries. So I don't even know what everybody's doing, but because of that, a lot of stuff is produced. We encourage people to use their imagination and to really express their passion in the best ways that they can through film and through action. And so right now, at any given time, we have about 200, 250 volunteers on the ships. There's 12 ships. And then we also have about 100 or so chapters worldwide that support the operation of those ships. And the strength of our movement is in volunteers. And I mean, you can't pay people to do what these volunteers do for nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's no hierarchy. There's no like, hey, Paul, we want to do this. We want to do the other thing. It's because you're saying there's all these different chapters. It's not like everything's getting funneled up top and there's a couple of people that are just, calling the shots. There's a larger movement and
well, there is
more freedom.
There is organization. We have an entity called Sea Shepherd Global, and it actually just coordinates the operation of the ships. But every country, whether it be Italy or Spain or Australia, is a separate entity. Okay. So it's not dictated to. But they all work in cooperation with Sea Shepherd Global to ensure that the ships are run and the campaigns take place. But they also do their own campaigns within their own borders.
I see. So they abide by certain guidelines that Sea Shepherd put forth, but then within their own countries, they do what they deem necessary.
Well, our guidelines are pretty simple. And that is the number one, don't hurt anybody. And number two, don't compromise. And also, we're not a protest organization. So those are really the guidelines.
Well, Paul, I want to say thank you so much for coming on the show. Like I said, I've been a fan. I've been following your work for many, many years. So I was happy to talk to you, and I was happy that you came on the show. And as far as if people want to join, if people want to, look for you guys, where can they find you?
Well, it's pretty easy to find us. SeaShepherd.org is our website. We're all over social networks, Facebook pages, and that. So, yeah, just SeaShepHerd, and you can find us.
All right, awesome. Yeah, and if you guys want to volunteer, please do this. This is an amazing movement that's doing amazing things. So hopefully more attention and keep doing what you guys are doing. So thanks again. Really appreciate it.
I just wanted to add that our volunteers come from all over the world. So they're from about 25 different countries at any given time and from a wide range of backgrounds. In fact, one of our captains is a former admiral and chief of staff for the Italian Navy. But at the same time, we have just ordinary people who have, might be students, might be carpenters, whatever, who come with us. So what we're looking for is passion. And that, I think, is what defines a really good crew member.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's true for anything. If you bring passion, eventually you'll do well within that industry.
I agree.
All right. So, yeah, man. Again, thank you so much for coming on and taking time out of your day. And keep doing what you're doing. Thanks again, Paul.
All right. Thank you.